When we moved back to Minnesota during the pandemic, I began working for Instacart. If you don't know what Instacart is, it is a grocery delivery service, much like Voila here in Canada. So my job all day was to drive around to different grocery stores, take people's grocery orders, purchase the groceries, and then deliver them to their house. I would try to do it as quickly and as carefully as possible. It's an interesting job in the midst of a global pandemic, right? Like going into large public spaces all day, although not always filled with people, and then shopping for people who were doing their best to stay home and stay safe. So I was in and out of my car all day, in and out of grocery stores and all around the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. I would try to make these deliveries as efficiently as possible. And after a while, I got a little competitive with myself, right? Like trying to see just how quickly I could shop and deliver the goods, right? And drive around the city. So it was an enjoyable job. And I aimed for like the highest customer ratings and the fastest delivery times. And nothing says speedy delivery like a big beige Kia Sedona van, right? So anyway, one day I'm driving along on my way to a grocery store. I'd just taken a delivery job for a customer. And as soon as you click, accept, the clock starts. So in my mind already, I'm like, all right, let's go. And I'm driving a familiar route. I'm driving over the Lake Street Bridge over the Mississippi River. And that probably means nothing to you other than the fact that on the bridge, it goes down from 2 lanes to 1, okay? So this is where passive aggressive driving is born. And there's a person, of course, on the right trying to get in, and I decide reluctantly, but also because I'm a saint, to let this person in at the last second, right? And so they scoot in front of me, and I'm like, "You're welcome," and we're all just in one big line. Well, when the cars start moving, the car ahead of me, which I so graciously let in, is just like puttering along, like hardly moving. And I'm like, what's going on? Like, hello, get off your phone, like pay attention. And you like scoot ahead a little bit and then stop. And scoot ahead a little bit. And like, meanwhile, the cars are just going, right? And I'm like, what the heck, dude? Like, will you please go? People have places to be. So anyway, so the car is just continuing to do this like accordion, like a little bit of acceleration and then nothing at all. And I'm like, is this guy for real? Right? Like at this point, my hopes of quickly arriving to the store to do the job they're out the window. So the car in front putters along over a little bit, but then all of a sudden just speeds up and it's like, and then slows down again. And I'm like, okay, there's something not right? So a block up, the driver gets into the left-hand turn lane, which is exactly where I need to be because I'm trying to get on the freeway. And so we're sitting there, but like something at that point like clicked, right? Like something in me was like, there's something not quite right? And even in my hurry and in my rush to get to the store, I'm like, I think I need to follow this person. Well, as soon as the light turns green, right? Like he punches the gas and he goes directly into the intersection and he goes straight. He does not turn. He goes straight and then veers off to the right. So veering off to the right, this is where the road splits, and there's one lane this way and one lane that way, and in the middle is this big median with signs and trees. And so the driver takes off and realizes that he's not going to make that, the turn very, very smoothly into the lane of traffic. So he ends up driving up onto the median, like boom, 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 and takes out a sign, just totally flattens it, gets into the lane of traffic, and is, doing one of these things, and I take off after him. And now he hasn't hit another car or a person at this point, and he hasn't like run dead into a tree, but I'm following him for about half a block, And then he takes a left-hand turn, right? And there's nowhere to go, just the median. And he goes over the median again, like totally over, like do-do, 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 do-do. And it goes into oncoming traffic. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And I pull the van over and I like throw on my mask and I put on some gloves and I run over to his car. Now he has slowed down to this point. I mean, he hasn't hit a tree, he hasn't hit another car, he hasn't hit a person. Like in everything that's happening, like this is an absolute miracle, right? Like that given how he's driving, that nobody's been hurt. Well, I run up and I see a pedestrian and I'm like, call 911. And I run up to the guy's window. He's got his window up, so I'm banging on the window. And I'm like screaming, stop, stop. And he slows down a little bit more and he just looks up at me. And he looks up at me like, who are you? What are you doing here? You know, it's funny now, but in the moment I'm like freaking out. Well, it's this elder gentleman and maybe, I don't know, and he's just totally catatonic. And so he slows the car down enough where I open the car door, I reach in across his lap, I put the car in park, take the keys out of the ignition and put them on the top of his car. And I'm like, sir, do you realize what you've just done? And he looks up at me, and he looks up at me the same way he looked up at me before. Totally catatonic, just glazed over, right? He doesn't say a word. And I'm like, what is going on? Well, the police quickly arrived. Somebody had obviously already called them. And the officer comes up to me and asks me what happened. But within like seconds, he looks at the driver and he's like, oh, he's in diabetic shock. I had no idea what that looked like, and I had no idea what it could lead you to do. So pretty scary, right? Well, I answered a few more of the officer's questions. A paramedic came. They got the guy into the ambulance and hopefully got some good help. But I share that story because it highlights like these two kinds of hurry, which is our topic today. So this is what hurry can look like. The first hurry I experienced was perceived hurry, right? In a perceived hurry, every little thing becomes urgent, emergent matter. Right? And I was hurrying in my own mind to try and get to a delivery job as quickly as possible, right? Because, as we've been told, time is money, okay? So, in this perceived hurry, right, my emotions, my feelings start bubbling up when I feel like I'm not allowed to hurry. And like, how do I respond to the world around me and the other driver, right? Like agitated and more anxious. And like over what, right? Like someone's grocery order and my own competitiveness with myself to get it done as fast as possible. Like we weren't designed to live like this. Like we were designed to live like everything is an urgent matter. But we often do, right? Okay, no wonder we're tired. But this is what we do, like we keep on at this pace. So the other hurry, to name that one, that happened in this instance was like appropriate hurry, right? Like the kind of hurry that happens when something goes wrong, right? When someone is in need or there's danger and we hurry to help that situation, right? This is the kind of hurry that is in the name of life and safety, right? Or for the sake of someone else. Well, here's what hurry can then look like, right? Unfortunately, we've lived so often from this place of perceived hurry. And even when we're not hurrying like ourselves, it is happening all around us. Or like it's the honk behind you when you're the first in line at a stoplight and you don't immediately punch the gas when the light turns green, right? Like, wow, like give me a second, right? There's this book I read this last week. It's called An Unhurried Life. Highly recommend. It's by Alan Fadling. So he talks about this. He calls it the gronk, like the green light honk. And he claims that this habit of honking at the first car in line is, quote, just a habit rooted in the belief that time is money and that hurry, therefore, is always profitable. Right? And I feel like this constant hurry is we're really just spinning our wheels, right? Like, I mean, how much further ahead do we actually get when we rush around like this? Like, we should heed the words from the rabbit from Alice in Wonderland, right? Say it with me: the hurrier I go, the behinder I get, right? Hurry actually only usually ends up just slowing us down. But the truth is, this hurry is manifested in all the things we do, right? Like our driving, our flying around our errands in the grocery store, and like how aggravated do we feel when we're trying to zip through a store and we get behind the person that's like, ooh, right? We just go crazy. Like this just manifests itself in so many parts of our lives. Like how often we do several things at once, even, right? Trying to hurry up and get it all done at the same time. And we're never really occupied with what or who is in front of us because we're preoccupied with everything else. Much of which is us just, again, spinning our own wheels. I don't know about you, but when I rush around like that, or I feel hurried in my mind, I have a shortness of breath. Like, I'm not actually running anywhere or climbing a mountain or anything that would legitimately get my heart rate up. But I start to breathe from my chest, or maybe even higher, and I don't breathe from my lungs or my stomach. It's not a healthy way to live. Maybe for you, it's like even just taking one look at your calendar, right? And you feel this rush of panic and anxiety about all the things you still have to get done. Right? And it doesn't help me that my calendar gives me these nudges, right, when I'm running behind, like, ooh, you should leave now if you want to make it to your next appointment on time. Like, right? Like, it's helpful, but also not. And this is what hurry looks like. And all of this hurry has just become our norm. And so this is what hurry does. Hurry, therefore, then also gives us a false sense of importance, right? Not just the anxiety, but when we live into this hurry, right, we start to believe things like, if you hurry, then you must have important things to do or important places to go, right? Like, if you are hurrying, then you are important. Then slowness, on the other hand, slowness must mean that you don't have important things to do. Right? You don't have important places to go. And if you don't hurry, then you must not be very important. And this even affects how we take time off, doesn't it? Or like how many of us have said after like a nice Saturday or a legitimate day off, and we were lazily hanging around and really doing nothing, right? Stayed in the sweats all day. But then at the end of the day, with maybe a hint of guilt, or somebody asks, how was your day off? And you're like, well, it wasn't very productive, right? Like, no, you permission to rest, right? Permission to not hurry around. Well, the psychologist and theologian named Gerald May penned this gem. He wrote, our efficiency makes unhurried times of reset feel selfish and lazy and irresponsible. Right? Like, we've begun to believe that. I'm like, how did we get here? So one more book for you. It's called Subversive Spirituality, written by Paul Jensen. And in that, he names actually 3 types of time pathologies and their effects. So see if any of these ring true for you. The first is time pressure. And in time pressure, it's the sense that there just isn't enough time for our task or tasks to get done. And the second is time urgency. And this happens with time when time pressure becomes a more frequent experience, right? Prompting us to feel the need to hurry or accelerate the rate at which we do things. And then the third is hurry sickness. Right? And this occurs when time urgency has become severe and chronic. And it changes our personality and our lifestyle. So he goes on to point out that these time pathologies actually have a detrimental effect on relationships, right? Not just us, but on relationships. and that it takes time to build and sustain healthy relationships, he writes. And he says time pressure can erode the quality of relationships and then create fragmentation and isolation. And hurry creates a false crisis in which I cannot care for the one before me. So for the sake of an honest cultural snapshot, okay, we're coming off of a pandemic, right? And it was a bit ago, but that was a huge part of our lives, and it was very isolating. Now we've only got back to normal with this wildly frenetic pace, trying to make up for lost time, I guess, but it's only led us into further fragmentation and isolation. So I've been thinking about this particular story with Jesus this week. If you want to follow along, we've been in Luke 8, and this is Luke 8, verses 40 through 48. And the story goes like this. So Jesus had just returned from some time away, right? He and the disciples had gone across the lake. This is where they found the demon-possessed man and healed him. But they've come back on the other side of the lake. And when they arrive, they are met by this gigantic crowd, like the same crowds they were like trying to take some space from a little bit ago. So moments after Jesus arrives, he's met with an extremely urgent matter. Okay, a synagogue leader by the name of Jairus comes running up to Jesus, and he has this plea of this as a desperate father. And he falls at Jesus' feet and he pleads with him to come to his house. He's like, my only daughter, who's 12, is dying, and I need you to come. Like, I know that you can heal her. So this situation begs for appropriate hurry, right? Like, a child is actively in trouble, dying, and there's something that can stop it. So let's stop it. It's Jesus, Jairus, the disciples, and then the rest of the massive crowd make their way on the road together to Jairus' house. And as they walk along, the crowd grows so large that it becomes difficult to walk, right? And everyone's bumping into each other, and the crowds, in the Greek, it actually says almost crush Jesus. They have this like crushing sensation just by the sheer volume of people. So unbeknownst to Jesus, right, in the midst of this crowd, there's this woman quietly searching for him. And she has probably her shawl pulled up over her head, trying to make sure she's not recognized or made, because she is someone who is unclean. And she is unclean because she has this hemorrhage where she can't stop bleeding. Right? And this has been going on for 12 years, okay? The same age as Jairus' daughter, but she's been unclean for 12 years, and she can't, like, there's no answer. Like, the doctors are like, you try this, and it doesn't work, and she spends money to get this fixed, and nobody has a solution for her. So she is just subject to constant bleeding. And this bleeding, according to the law, is what makes her unclean. And because she's unclean, anything or anyone she touches also becomes unclean. So out of respect and the law and for public health, if she goes out into public, she is supposed to say aloud, unclean, unclean. Like, she's supposed to let people know, right? Because if she touches them, then they're unclean. It's this whole thing. So I don't have to describe to you the kind of shame she probably carries around, right? But in a moment of courage and great risk, she works her way into the pressing crowd, right? Touching lots of people along the way to get close to Jesus. Because she thinks, if I get close enough to him, and I'm going to remain unseen, if I just reach out and touch the hem, like the corner of his garment, then I'll be healed, right? She's convinced that if she can just touch that, she might be healed. We might call that magical thinking, but for her, it's an incredible faith. Right? And so she reaches out and she touches it. And as soon as she touches it, the bleeding stops. Like, it's an absolute miracle. Like, it worked, right? It's just like this huge sigh of relief. Oh, thank God, like, it worked. But then Jesus stops. And he's like, hey, who touched me? And then the crowd stops. right? And she's like, oh man, what have I done, right? And then Peter, who's always good for saying something, he chimes in and he's like, Jesus, the people are crowding and pressing against you. Like, everybody's touching you. What do you mean, who touched you? Right? But Jesus doesn't let it go, and he explains to everyone what he experienced. Right? He was like, no, like, someone touched me. Like, I know that power has gone out from me. Right? Somebody needed healing, and they took it. Right? I can feel that. That's what I'm talking about. So I just like want to stop and point out that, like, what benevolence Jesus has, right? This benevolent God to walk around with this miraculous healing power, right? Like, his miraculous healing power is just at the ready and accessible to those who need it, right? Who have faith in it and who simply reach out for it. Like, Jesus is like, here, it's for you. I'm ready to give it to you. I don't think we should go much further without recognizing that gift. So this healing power goes out from Jesus, and he stops and he says something. And he could have just let it go, right? Like, he could have been like, oh, I guess somebody needed healing. Well, I'm glad they know they can have it. And he just carries on his way, right? Because there's an urgent matter. Like, there's something that they're hurrying to, right? This young girl. But he stops everybody. And the woman realizes that she's been made, right? And she's totally got to be nervous, right? Like, because she knows the societal implications of what she's done. So she decided to just go with the truth, the whole truth. And she falls at Jesus' feet, just like Jairus had done. And the text says this: in the presence of all the people, she told why she had touched him and how she'd been instantly healed. It's an incredibly vulnerable thing to do. Not only is this a very personal thing to share, she also implicates herself and takes great risk to share. Right? Like, knowing full well that she could find herself in major trouble for touching a rabbi, right? And let alone all these other people, as an unclean person. But Jesus has no intention of implicating her. He lets her tell her whole story because, one, I think it's healing for her to tell it, and then to tell the whole truth in the presence of her community so that her community can hear her story. Like, it's also important for her community to witness and hear it. Right? And because so much of what happens with people who get pushed out and have this story, the story becomes larger than life, and there's all these other stories about it, right, that are likely untrue. And then Jesus kneels down and he does something incredible. He says, daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace. He calls her daughter and brings her back into the family of community, right? He gives her a relational name, right? And then, although it was his power that healed her, he gives it back to her, right? He says, your faith has healed you. Now, how empowering is that? He gives the power to her and honors her faith and her hope and says, you get it, go in peace. It's a wonderful story of redemption, right? It's restorative and it's communal. And it's also a revealing story about being present. Jesus provides this wonderful example of appropriate, holy hurry for the sake of a child's life. But while on the way to save this little girl, which he does, he's not in such a rush that he fails to see and care for another immediate need. Even in this massive crowd of people, he is able to pay attention to and notice the one who is in need. It's this keen and holy perception that we could continue to keep at a distance, right? And say, like, well, that's just Jesus being Jesus, right? Like, he gets it. Except for the fact that Jesus says, follow me. I do as I do. See how I see. Jesus is once again showing us what it looks like to walk about this world, right? How to pay attention, even in the midst of hurry and crowds and noise for that matter, right? Like all the things, all the distractions we've been talking about, Jesus is saying, pay attention. Pay attention. Pay attention to ourselves, right? Like the amount of hurry and all the things that we're doing, right? To the world around us. And then in doing so, to keep, take an honest look at our pace and our hurry, right? And Jesus, who's full of the Spirit, calls us to live with that same Spirit and the fruits of it in the midst of all this hurry around us. He says, come live a different way. Walk with a different pace in this hurried, frenetic, frantic world and see. Because there are always going to be people who are hurting. There are always going to be people who are trying to reach out. And they're going to be lost in the crowd. And they're going to be lost in our hurry. Right? Because when we hurry around, like we just have blinders, right? Like physically, but also emotionally, mentally, like we're just so consumed with what we need to get done or the things that we fear won't get done. And then we just block the world out. And Jesus is saying, there's a different way. There's a different way for you that is also good for the world around you. So with the places in our lives, the time, like we are going to hurry again. Like, right, like I'm not saying we should go about with this like perfect, unhurried, like this, sometimes this just feels impossible, right? But to be paying attention, right? To not be so hurried that we can't see, or that we can't see the one in front of us, or that we don't have time to care or to listen. Again, Jesus is calling us to a different way. It's the way always of life. It's the way of healing. It's communal. It's all the things that happened to the woman that day, right? It's this gracious invitation. It's this benevolence of his power to go out. It's this benevolence of seeing and bringing people in. I pray that we can have the courage and just the mind and the grace for ourselves to walk a little slower, right? And with a not so much of a perceived hurry in our lives, for the sake of neighbors' good and our own health, and for what Jesus calls us to. Amen.
At 29 and I find myself wondering what did happen to the last 10. I ran away with my life, fast forward.